All right. Well, in keeping with tradition, the first guest in the history of the show had to join us for the first episode of the new year. And it's fitting as we put a bow on 2020 officially and look ahead to what is shaping up to be a massive 2021. Have to be joined once again by the voice of the UFC broadcast, the Jaylen Brown to my Peyton Pritchard, the great Jon Anik. Happy New Year, my man. How are you?
Happy 2021 to you, my man. It's good to be with you. It's good to be kicking off a new year with a lot of fights. I mean, I'm on an email chain with these bout notifications, and I can tell you, man, these fight announcements are coming fast and furious. So it's going to be an interesting first quarter. And I think for those of us that have had a couple weeks at home, we're kind of jonesing to get back on the road and get to Fight Island again.
I agree, man. There's just so much to talk about. And it's crazy to look back on that conversation we had in early April of 2020 with where the world was at the time, and fast forward to where we're at now after a storyline filled year with the pandemic and massive fights and breakout stars, just leaving us with so much to talk about. I'm curious, Jon, like when your kids, when even like your grandkids someday down the road, someday ask you like, what was 2020 like? What do you think you're going to say?
Well, I'm hopeful that 2021 isn't going to be super similar to 2020. I can't sit here and tell you that we're out of the woods. 2 days ago, there were north of 31,000 cases in my home state of Florida alone, right? So I am hopeful that come the fourth quarter, I won't be taking a COVID-19 test at my house, administering it on my own as I did yesterday. But yeah, man, obviously, I think for a lot of us, even for my kids, when they look back at a year that was void of school and full of masks and not being able to go to restaurants or go to gymnastics or anything like that, I think we're hopeful that the end is in sight. And certainly with vaccinations coming down the pipe, hopefully we can get vaccinated, when we're prioritized. I'm not saying that we should go to the front of the line. But you got to think that 2021 is gonna bring some wholesale changes and things that are better than what we dealt with last year.
Yeah, I hope you're right about that. You know what? Just kind of putting a bow on 2020. I do want to get your take on something, if I could, because you being a massive sports fan and MMA compared to like a lot of the other sports that we watch, it's still a baby. Like the UFC compared to all these other organizations is still a baby, but we had our year-end awards at MMA Fighting, and most of the individual awards, everybody was universally in agreement with, but there was one that got people all sorts of fired up, the 2020 Breakout Fighter of the Year. So basically how it works, Jon, is like the staff will rank their top 5 for each of these awards, and whoever gets the most points wins the award. But this one went to Khamzat Chimaev, and personally, I gave it to Kevin Holland, but I completely understand anybody giving it to Chimaev because he went from relatively unknown, unless you were a fan of him going up, to this massive figure that we couldn't go a single show without getting a question about or talking about. Man, have I been getting hammered for writing that article because everyone thought it was Kevin Holland. The interpretation of that award can go in so many different ways, Jon, but what are your thoughts of that? Because outside of me saying Volkanovski Holloway 2 wasn't a robbery, I can't remember getting beat up so badly on the internet when I actually went with the masses for my pick.
Well, big picture, I will start with big mouth Kevin Holland. And I think maybe some of us underestimated just how much support there is domestically and internationally for Kevin Holland after a 5-0 2020. And I really think the nature of the Jacare fight that seemingly was watched by a lot of people was such that it took him to the next level. Midway through the year, he's beating Darren Stewart, coming over the octagon and saying to Dana White, hey, man, I didn't even know if I won tonight. I want to run that back and give the dentist another shot, So the only argument against Kevin Holland is the strength of schedule, right? A lot of these year-end awards, you're starting with the champions. Kenny Florian on our podcast said Davison Figueiredo was the breakout star of the year. I think that might have been a byproduct of just trying to find some hardware for Figueiredo, who wasn't his male fighter of the year. But it just depends how you quantify it. The criteria is open to interpretation. I mean, you could argue Amanda Hebos. For me, Khamzat Chimaev was the breakout star of 2020. And I think that has to do with where he was in 2019 relative to where he is entering 2021. But again, man, these awards, they certainly light people up. Male Fighter of the Year was very contentious on our show. But I think as long as you find some sort of trophy for Kevin Holland, for Khamzat Chimaev, maybe you give him Rookie of the Year, then all's well that ends well.
There you go. Of course, like Jon said, if you want to get more on the award season, Anik and Florian just gave their hardware away. So go check that out on YouTube or wherever you're listening to your podcast. But We've thrown the 2020 calendar in the trash, John. It's on to 2021, and the year will begin on Fight Island. 3 events in an 8-day stretch, and it kicks off next Saturday, the 16th. UFC Fight Island 7, headlined by Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar. More on the fight in a moment, but it was made official that the event will be not just airing on ESPN Plus, but will also be broadcast on ABC. And as a guy who probably watched a lot of sports in his heyday on ABC, Monday Night Football, and so forth and so on, Wide World of Sports, this is pretty cool, is it not?
It's exciting, and I try to sort of steer clear of the ratings conversation because I got to stay in my lane and focus on what I do. And it's nice when we do a big number, but that can't be my focus. I can't be disappointed when we don't do a number that I was expectant that we would do. But it's huge. I actually wasn't even in line to call this show, and now I'm thankful to be getting the opportunity. So we're heading to Fight Island a week early. Initially, I was just going to go for the pay-per-view at the end of the rip. But it's big, man. I think sometimes we're so internally invested and in it that, to me, a show that's wall-to-wall on UFC Fight Pass feels very similar to a UFC Fight Night on ABC. And as my friend, you know that, and you know what my reality is. But it's exciting, you know. It's exciting when I get text messages from friends I haven't heard of that are mainstream sports fans that say, I just read an article that the UFC is going to be on ABC. So that gives me maybe a lens into which, you know, I'm not usually looking, and maybe suggest that it's a bigger deal than I have thought it is. So we're excited. Boots to the ground, 13 fights, Michael. Here we go.
Here we go. Holloway versus Kattar, the first main event of 2021. It seemed like this is the path to take, right? You have Max Holloway, who has been in nothing but title fights for the last 4 years. He now takes on a very hungry New Englander in Calvin Kattar, who I believe was a bigger story in 2020 than he may be getting credit for, because this loaded, talent-filled featherweight division needed some movement up the top, and Calvin stayed busy, got 2 big wins, and that activity, those performances over Jeremy Stephens and Dan Ige, set himself up for this massive fight. But man, what do you think of this, the first of 3 main events in Abu Dhabi coming up next Saturday?
Yeah, probably criminal that a lot of us got through our awards show formalities without even dropping the name Calvin Kattar. So I think you're wise to sort of bring him up in that context, given how big 2020 was for him. It's a huge fight. And I kind of feel like, Mike, I was the guy after Holloway Volkanovski too, who said, man, I'd hate to be Max Holloway's next opponent because he's going to put it on somebody after, getting hosed largely. I hate to throw out that robbery term, but I definitely walked away from those 25 minutes thinking that Max Holloway had regained his title. And fights are big swings to begin with. When you lose a title fight like that, and all of a sudden you're not a 2-time UFC featherweight champion and you're not defending your belt, it's almost like walking back into your new life. So massively disappointing for Max Holloway, but a big opportunity for him to gain back a lot of that steam against the oncoming Calvin Kattar. With respect to my guy Ken Flo, I think Calvin Kattar is probably Boston's best hope for a UFC champion. I think he has most of the tools that you need. I think it's going to be a byproduct of getting the big fights and staying healthy. I hate to keep banging this drum, but his hands were pretty sore after the Dan Ige fight. It's a 25-minute fight. I do think you have to be measured and try to, maybe conserve some energy and some health early on in a 25-minute fight. But what a great main event for us on ABC. I mean, you're embedded. You know all too well how good that fight is on paper. And, I can't see how it's boring. So nice showcase for those 2 guys. And hopefully for the Bostonians, Calvin Kattar is dropping that Methuen accent on the ABC masses at the end of the fight. You never know.
You mentioned something that's become kind of a big storyline heading into this fight, and others I've spoken with said the same thing. I talked to Michael Chiesa the other day about this, and even Calvin mentioned it when I spoke with him a couple of weeks ago. The question is Max Holloway over that fight with Volkanovski, the second one? Like, is he looking beyond Kattar towards a third fight with the current champion? Is that something that's on your mind as well? Like, Max is a consummate pro, and you never know what he's thinking, even when he says what he says. Or do you think this is more of like a creation of a storyline for storyline's sake?
I think the latter. I think he's the greatest featherweight of all time. He may not have the title defenses that Jose Aldo does necessarily, but he is the greatest featherweight fighter of all time. And the version that he presented against Alexander Volkanovski and against City Kickboxing and against Eugene Behrman and that great team that is obviously trying to beat Max Holloway and his great team, his longstanding team, those adjustments, that performance in the rematch should be hugely encouraging to Hawaiians and to Max Holloway fans. So I think he is elite enough an athlete physically and mentally that you can expect a prime time performance from Max Holloway. And I still think he'll get a great shot from Calvin Kattar, but I certainly think Holloway deserves to be entrenched as a 2-1 favorite. And I expect him to be as good as ever and as good as he was, in the Volkanovski fight a few months ago.
Yeah, lots to like on this card. We got Breeze versus Akhmedov. Joaquin Buckley makes his 2021 debut against Alessio Di Chirico. Return of Santiago Ponzinibbio. We got Carlos Condit versus Matt Brown, maybe the most under-the-radar fight on Fight Island. Very fun. And then we go to Wednesday, the 20th, Michael Chiesa and Neil Magny, the main event for that one. And as we all know by now, Leon Edwards versus Khamzat Chimaev postponed once again. But man, I'm glad these guys got the bump up to keep this division in the forefront, because I feel like welterweight has so many unanswered questions coming out of 2020, especially in the top 5 and the top 10. Like, big fight coming up on the 20th between these two under the radar guys at 170, looking to get over that hump and closer to the top 5 themselves. What say you in regards to Chiesa versus Magny on the 20th?
Yeah, it's a good problem to have, but I think the sports fan embedded in all of us wants that clarity a little bit at lightweight and at welterweight. But yeah, it's a fascinating main event. I think it's simplistic to just say that because it's now 25 minutes and not 15 that the advantage swings to Neil Magny. Michael Chiesa has outstanding cardio. I think he's got to find a choke. I don't think he necessarily wants to play the long game, but I think these guys match up so well with each other. They're both known for being super hard workers. I think they're both on the cusp. And I also think they're both in their prime. Magny has obviously had some historic runs that didn't result in championship opportunities, but I do think he's better than that guy that was ripping off 6 or 7 in a row. So I'm very excited to see what these guys can do. And Chiesa deserves this type of fight. He was fighting in the wrong division for way too long, and I think he would be the first to acknowledge that publicly. So I'm excited to see what he can do. This is the fight that he's wanted. A lot of people, I don't know if it's his lack of knockout power on paper, but a lot of people are calling out Neil Magny, and Chiesa gets the fight. We'll see what he can do with it in 14 days, my man.
Yeah, he's very healthy. He had the knee surgery. It didn't go well initially, but he seems to be as healthy as he's ever been heading into a fight. So that's the Wednesday card. That's really good, but we'll be diving deeper into that one on MMA Fighting for sure as we get closer. But first pay-per-view of 2021, January 23rd, Conor McGregor is back taking on Dustin Poirier in a rematch. And we know how the first fight went, but that seems like it was forever ago now, John, but it's still part of the story. But these are just two completely different fighters now in 2021, are they not?
No doubt about it. And I think Conor McGregor doesn't get the credit he deserves as being one of the best strikers in MMA. Distance management, power, knowing what to throw and when to throw it, adding layers, getting better constantly. The shoulder strikes against Donald Cerrone. Not every day you see that as a method of victory. And by the way, mixed in a head kick for good measure. When some people talk about what Conor McGregor did in 2020, he was the perfect fighter. Circumstances prevented him from making that walk again. But I'm just excited to see McGregor at 155 pounds, where he hasn't competed all that often in the UFC. It's crazy to think that he has one 155-pound win in the UFC, and that was the championship over Eddie Alvarez. It's a fascinating number. Obviously, Poirier is a completely different beast than he was in 2014. It's amazing how good Poirier was, though, back then. And if you talk to him now, he just knew so much less than he knows now. And I think it's been a mental evolution as much as a physical one for him. I think the miles on the Poirier tank could be a benefit and could be a detriment. That Hooker fight was an absolute war, and there were wars on top of wars, So I do think it stands to reason that Conor McGregor is going to be the fresher fighter. Poirier and McGregor are both putting themselves through hell right now. But it's as good as it gets, man. It really is. And I think the only sprinkle would be if the title was on the line, but certainly feels like a championship fight to me.
Yeah, you made a great point about Poirier's mileage, and it could be a help to him. And you kind of saw it in that Dan Hooker fight, because that second round between those two guys was just absolutely ridiculous. And maybe the Dustin Poirier of old, if he was in that position, he might have got finished in the second round. But the composure he showed in that moment makes me so intrigued for this fight with Conor, because he doesn't freak out when he's in these moments anymore. He's able to get through them. Is that something you notice as well? Does that just spark an extra bit of intrigue to you?
Yeah, it's a great point by you, and you're seeing me nod my head. And I do think the UFC Apex has an effect on certain fighters this tremendous calming influence. And I think Poirier kind of walked out, felt like he was better than Dan Hooker everywhere, as humbly as he would say that, and just felt very comfortable in that environment, almost as if it's a glorified sparring session. You saw him talking shit to the broadcast team and Michael Bisping, if I'm not mistaken, and then going right up to Dan after the fact. It's a very intimate setting. And Fight Island is different, right? I don't know how many fans are going to be in the building. I don't know how many VIPs are going to be in the building, but I do know that the 30-foot octagon is going to be in the goddamn building, and there are going to be at least a couple of hundred people around the octagon. It's a different setting. And by the way, Conor McGregor is going to be walking through that door and not Dan Hooker. So I can't wait to see how it plays out. You know, I haven't had a chance to call all that many of McGregor's fights. I feel like I've been step by step with Poirier for his entire UFC career. So excited to see Conor make that walk, and come hell or high water, man. However many COVID tests I got to beat, I'm going to be there January 23.
Great nod to Rick Pitino with the walking through the door comment. I dig it. Of course, Michael Chandler's going to debut against the aforementioned Dan Hooker on that card. That's a banger. That's a big one. Of course, Gaethje and Charles Oliveira are out there as well, kind of on the outside looking in. And as good as and as important as 155 has been for the UFC, do you think this is like the most fascinating year to come in the history of the lightweight division in your mind, with all these questions unanswered?
Yeah, I don't know how you could argue otherwise, you know, and my inbox got a couple of doozies yesterday, right? I mean, it's fascinating to see how it all will play out. And I also think Islam Makhachev is an interesting name to bring up, because one thing that I think a fan suggested, maybe one of our podcast listeners, if you want a shot at Khabib, if you really want to be the guy that maybe would draw Khabib back, you know, or if you're Drew Dober or whomever it's going to be, go beat Islam Makhachev, right? Go knock that guy out. And maybe that'll, you know, get Khabib's competitive spirit going a little bit, because, you know, that camp believes Makhachev is a future UFC lightweight champion. And they believe it's a matter of if, not when. Or when, not if, I should say. So fascinated to see what happens at 55, to see if Chandler, you know, can really be a factor, because that's biting off a whole lot with Dan Hooker as the entry fight. So, yeah, man, the cupboard is the furthest thing from bare, and we're excited to see how it all plays out here in a couple weeks, man.
Of course, the big question is whether or not Khabib comes back, because, I mean, you were there, UFC 254, what a moment that was, submits Justin Gaethje and then announces retirement. But the UFC, Dana White has not closed the door completely yet. They're going to be meeting early next week. But what's your gut telling you, John? Do you think we've seen the last of Khabib, or do you think something entices him back in there?
Well, I think if you're asking me, does he compete in the next 12 months? I don't think so. You know, I don't see much differentiation between 29-0 and 30-0. You know, go start playing 29 black on the roulette wheel, you know, move it on, right? I just don't see some value in one more win. You know what I mean? Especially if he made his promise to his mother. Now, there's a lot of guys out there that provide intriguing challenges, and maybe that would be something that Khabib could speak to. But right now, that competitive spirit isn't necessarily there. And the manner in which he disposed of two interim champions is such that, you know, those rematches don't make a lot of sense. So I know he eventually is going to get some sort of competitive itch. Maybe he can scratch it as a coach. I really don't know. But I think you'll see him maybe in a grappling setting at some point, but in 36 months, maybe. But I just don't see him in the UFC in 12 months. And I hope I'm right on that. I think he had a great capstone and a great moment. I'm not in any great desire to see him rush back to the table.
I'm with you on that one. I just got back from picking my son up at school. I know you got to get ready to pick your kids up from school in a few minutes, but I did want to get your take on a couple more things before we let you go, John. First off, and I've said this a million times now, Dana White deserves a ton of credit for what he did to get things back in 2020, 100%. But one thing that's kind of irked me, John, is to see his relationship with the MMA media deteriorate even more so than has been in a long time. It's been interesting to watch. And I'm sure you saw the video where he shut down the naysayers and proved people wrong, et cetera. But I'm curious, what did you think of that video? Because listen, there are some in this space who are negative, John, and I'm sure you've seen it. But at the end of the day, I feel like the majority of the media members, we had questions, and I think we're right to have those questions as this is all coming together. So this notion that the MMA media tried to stop this from happening, In my opinion, it's a bit far-fetched, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that if I could. And do you think that this relationship between the media and Dana White can improve? Because you know him better than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfortunate, and I think a lot of what you bring up is fair, and I will couch what I say with the fact that I basically turned in my card as a broadcast journalist when I signed with the UFC in 2011 and essentially became a promoter. I will say, though, as somebody who works for the UFC and is a full-time employee, I think a lot of us got a little bit defensive, right? That maybe we weren't getting the national credit as a whole for putting these live events on in this climate, you know? And when some of the mainstream sports leagues, for lack of a better way to put it, would come back, they would do so with all this fanfare. And how are they doing this? And why wasn't the NBA calling Dana White and Hunter and Lawrence Epstein and trying to figure out what the UFC was doing to try to expedite some of their problems? So I did get a little bit defensive and sort of wanted to see the UFC, and not just Dana White, but our executives, get a modicum of credit for what we were able to accomplish in 2020. You know, I mean, they give out the Emmys. Nobody's acknowledging what the UFC has done from a live production standpoint. So maybe that's a separate conversation. But I do believe that maybe there were some unfair criticisms levied at the media. It's hard for me to sort of go too far down that path, obviously. But obviously, we need the media as much as we need the fans. We need everybody back in the building. And nobody will be happier than me, I can assure you, when we have some sense of normalcy. But there's been great support of this organization, as you know, from yourself and from a lot of media members. And I don't know, man, there's so much noise and toxicity in this MMA space. And, you know, I got 3 kids and packing lunches, and dude, like, I'm out of my skull piece trying to just keep my damn life together. So I get asked a lot about that. You know, to me, it's just another day in this MMA paradise that I think we're all thankfully to have some sort of seat in, you know.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know, and hopefully that I mean, I get compared to Dana White all the time because of the looks and the bald head and all that stuff. They say I'm Dana's kid and everything, but you know, someday hopefully this can all improve, John.
I agree. I agree. And again, I used to work for ESPN when I was forced to ask Dana White the hard-hitting questions, and our relationship was obviously different then than it is right now. But I'm hoping that things can improve here in 2021. It's all roses and rainbows in 2021, Mike Heck. I mean, let's be honest.
I love it, man. And I am going to ask you about this. You know, we're face to face. I think it's fair.
Hey, it's up to me to not perjure myself.
You can, yeah, if you think about it a lot, you can tell me. But I am sure that you have seen and heard over the last year, several months, about Joe Rogan, and he's been taking a little bit of a beating on the broadcast. And let me just say this. I think at times I have been critical, but while some people are ready to just throw him out of the seat, I'm not ready to throw him out of the seat. I feel like he's still got a ton to bring to these broadcasts, but at times I feel like the 3-man booth and having 2 color guys more specifically, I feel like it kind of hampers him a little bit. I mean, that's just where I sit, but I wanted to ask you about all that because I feel like after every pay-per-view, when we're doing these live post shows here on MMA Fighting, we get a ton of Rogan questions and people just criticizing him and how he handles himself in the broadcast. So I wanted to, if you don't mind, to kind of get your take on the whole situation because, you know, sort of like the Dana situation, you know him a lot better than most of us who are criticizing him.
Right. Sometimes it's hard for me to assess the totality of a broadcast right after the fact. And really, I would need to, not unlike a fan or media member, go back and fine-tooth comb the thing to address specific criticisms. I can tell you that for me, I do try to take that constructive criticism and employ it in the next show. I mean, for all the noise that's out there, there is certainly some constructive stuff that I think you can take to the next show. I have seen some of that. You know, I think that, again, the social media space after these live events can be a tough place for us to sort of engage and habitate. But I think for Joe, there are a lot of different factors. I think he has never been happier in that broadcast booth, and I hate to put words in his mouth, but I really think he enjoys the dynamic. He was in a 2-man booth forever where he was just working with a play-by-play guy. He couldn't bounce off of a fighter, and I think it's been an adjustment for all of us. I mean, my job, as I've said to you, is a totally different thing in a 3-man booth versus a 2-man booth in terms of the real estate that I have, in terms of what is asked of me, but no broadcast is the same, and I can assure you, big picture, like we do look at everything that people say, and we ain't trying to get worse. Like, we're trying to get better. But if you're asking me, I think he still adds tremendous value. I still think that there's a special, undeniable quality to our broadcast when he is a part of it. And I can assure you he ain't going nowhere. Again, I hate to put words in his mouth, but he absolutely loves this job. And I think we had a little bit of an international flair with some of the pay-per-views at the end of the year. You know, there were big shows like UFC 251, 253, 254 that he wasn't a part of because they were happening in Abu Dhabi. But hopefully domestic pay-per-views return here more so in 2021, and he gets a chance to get back out there more often. You know, it's not that easy stepping up every 8 weeks trying to do one of these things and constantly having a revolving door with the broadcast team. But I love the guy. I've never been closer to him than I am right now on January 6, 2021, and hopefully he's here well past me.
Big question, John, is
how'd I fucking do is the question.
You effing did great, John. You did amazing. Right. Excellent answer. I appreciate the candidness. And obviously a huge question as I'm looking at you right now. True or false, is the mustache sticking around for Fight Island?
So does this look like a mustache to you right now? Sort of, right? Or no?
Yeah. Sort of,
I mean, so I don't know. It evolves, Mike. I mean, again, it's like it grows so goddamn fast that if I shaved everything off right now, I'll have a mustache by the time I board that plane on Saturday. So yeah, I've been rocking this thing now. It's been well over a year. So I don't know if you want me to wear this at UFC 257, just say the word. It'll be there. You want the stash?
I think you got to keep it, man.
All right. Done.
Yeah.
Breaking news. MMAfighting.com. Mustache station.
Looking like Wade Boggs and Jody Reed, John.
Jody Reed, number 3 in your program right there.
You are the man. I appreciate you always giving me so much time. It's a new year, big fights coming up. And for people that have missed your voice, obviously this is a good filler before you put that headset on in Abu Dhabi. And of course, you can check out the Anik and Florian podcast for more Jon Anik as well. Thank you, John. Safe travels. All the best to you in Abu Dhabi, my man.
Always got time for you, buddy. I enjoy listening and watching, and we'll be tracking you from Fight Island, kid. We'll see you soon.